Well, let me give you an idea of what we're doing today. Rationalism and Atheism is a boring topic title. I should have written a better topic title. That's on me. I believe I gave you the titles. So I think this one's my fault. It is a pretty boring topic title. It's not a boring topic. I should have picked a better title. But what we're going to look at today is we're going to address two big questions. Big question number one, what do we do when someone has what we call in our culture sveikus in emunah? That is, that they doubt the faith. They're not sure they believe in God anymore, Rahman al-Islam. They're not sure they believe in the truth of Torah. What do we do with that particular brand of Yetzer Hara? Is there a cure for it? Is there a response to it? What should a Jew do if they start to have such feelings? The general spiritual advice for someone who's having a spiritual malady, and the greatest spiritual malady that a Jew can have is doubting their own Judaism, given that Judaism is what we are. Is the Torah. So number one, we're going to address that. Number two, we're going to address rational arguments for the truth of God and the truth of Torah, and whether we resort to these, if we resort to these, which ones we use, how we explain them. There is an argument to be made that we don't do rational approaches to Judaism because Judaism is inherently not rationalistic. I think anybody who knows the Rambam would probably push back against that, but such a shita does exist. So we're going to look at the Rebbe shita and see, is the Rebbe comfortable with us using books like Mer Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed? Is the Rebbe comfortable with us using books like the Kuzari to explain rational approaches to Judaism? Or does the Rebbe want us to grab our fellow Jew by the shoulders, shake them and go, God is real, and not really do the rational approach? So that's what we're covering today if we get the microphone up. If not, we'll just fabrang. Is this working? No, not really. That's the overview. I should probably just go, right, Rabbi? Yeah? All right. I mean, I like the feel. I like when my office is set up, you know? Somebody asked me one time, unrelated to our class, why it is that Hasidim seem to enjoy davening at tables. You know, nobody else likes this but Hasidim. Do you know this? You know, you go to normal shuls, not Hasidic shuls. We're not normal. You go anywhere else, they have chairs. And sometimes the chair, then maybe lean on the, you know, in the rabbi's shul, there's these fancy ones from Kibbutz Lavi where it leans out a little bit, you get a bit of a stender. But by Chassidim, if there is a table in a shul, and it can be a rickety folding table that's got a coffee spill all over it, if there's a table hiding in the corner somewhere, the Chassidim will crowd around the table and leave these beautiful chairs alone. Why do Chassidim like tables and not chairs? You've noticed this? It's a cultural phenomenon. We really like tables. I don't know if you've noticed this in your section, but men, we like tables. We do. Somebody asked me one time, one of these Q&As, why do Hasidic men specifically seem to like tables more than chairs when it comes to praying? And I have no idea. It's probably a cultural phenomenon. Maybe it's the feeling of a fabreng, and maybe it's just that we got more stuff, you know? We have like 2 pairs of tefillin and a siddur and a sefer chassidus. We want to spread out. But I proposed a theory. That's probably the reason, right? Probably the reason. But I proposed a theory anyway. My theory is this. When a person sits, as you are sitting right now, you are spectators and I am performing. You're here to listen and I'm here to talk. That's the way that it works when you're sitting in a chair and someone's in front of you. However, that's not what prayer is. Prayer is not a spectator sport. Prayer is not where we listen to the chazan. Prayer is aved. That's where we go to work. And when you go to work, you work at a desk. You don't work in the audience. So my theory is that the reason why Chassidim want to be sitting at a desk when they pray is because this is what I look like when I'm working, and this is what I look like when I'm listening. We don't come to shul to listen. We come to shul to work. So, my working theory. I think the real theory is that we really just want to spread out a little. Let's get right into the actual letters. In response to people writing to the Rebbe saying that they're not sure they believe in God, they're not sure they believe in Torah, the Rebbe has a very consistent answer, and it is, I'm going to show you a couple examples, but it's shockingly consistent. Shockingly consistent, I mean, once again, 15, 20 letters that all say pretty much the same thing, and they all have one big bottom line. Somebody writes to the Rebbe saying, I'm not sure I believe in God, I'm not sure I believe in the truth of Torah, and the Rebbe writes back, you do believe in God, and you do believe in the truth of Torah, you're wrong. Not that you're wrong about what's true, you're wrong about yourself. Across the board. People tell the Rebbe, I'm not sure I believe in God. He goes, sure you do. I'm not sure I believe in Torah. Sure you do. How do you get one over on the Rebbe? We'll read some of these inside, and you'll see the approach. But the approach generally, for me to say it outside first, is that every single Jew automatically believes in God. Every single Jew automatically believes in Torah. Every single Jew is inherently a nefesh elokis. Wow, that's way too loud. Every single Jew is inherently a godly soul. And if I have something in me that pushes back against what I am supposed to be, that's my Yetzer Hara, that's not me. So when a Jew says, I'm not sure I believe in God, what they should say is, I have a Yetzer Hara that is whispering in my ear that it's not sure it believes in God. How do I quiet it down? But by making it my identity, you miss the whole point of what a Jew is. A Jew is someone who inherently believes it's not just inherent, but inherited. Let's read one of these letters inside. This letter is from Chaf Beis Kislev Tavshin Chaf Aleph. That would be 1971. And the Rebbe writes, the holy books, and also... 61, excuse me, thank you. Because that would be Lamed, 61. The holy books, and also the books of Chassidus, attest to the fact that every single Jew has complete faith in God, because every single Jew is called a son of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and a daughter of Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. So just start with the basics. A Jew, according to our Torah, believes in God, and our Torah is true. So the Rebbe starts off by saying, you cannot convince me that a Jew doesn't believe in God, because the Torah tells me a Jew believes in God, and I believe in the Torah. Which means if we truly believe in the Torah, we don't believe that there's a possibility that a Jew could truly not believe in God. Atheism is impossible for a Jew. It can't be real. It can't be real. Otherwise, God forbid, the Torah's wrong. So my belief in God obligates me to say that every Jew believes in God. That's the Rebbe's opening line to someone who writes to him saying, I'm not sure I believe in God. Rebbe, I'm not sure I believe in God. Okay, well listen, my religion says you do. However, sometimes the evil inclination confuses the power of thought and misleads a person into thinking about other things or opposite things. The Rebbe has clarified. Why do you think you have problems with faith? Because you have a Yetzer Hara. Most people have a Yetzer Hara, and that shouldn't surprise you terribly. Some people have a Yetzer Hara that tells them to eat non-kosher. Some people have a Yetzer Hara that tells them to violate Shabbos. And some people have a Yetzer Hara that tells them that God might not exist or that the Torah might not be true. But it's just a Yetzer Hara. Don't overthink it. People take some Yetzer Haras far too seriously. You'll get Rahman al-Islam, you'll get young Torah students who are frum and raised in frum homes. A lot of them have a stage like this. And a bacher will call me, a young Torah scholar will call me, and will say, Rabbi, I think I've caught the disease. I have doubts in faith. And I'll say back, oh, you have a Yetzer Hara. Let's not pathologize this. This isn't your first Yetzer Hara. It's not the first time your mind, the Nefesh HaBahamis, the animalistic soul that hides in the left side of your heart, has raised its voice and tried to pull you from the path of truth. Don't make it into a bigger deal than it is. People think this is a faith crisis. This isn't a faith crisis. This is a good old-fashioned Yetzer Hara that is really not any different than suddenly wanting to eat a good-tasting piece of treif. You smell good treif as you're walking down the street and your mind goes, hey, I think I'd like to smell that. No one says, I might be a treif eater. No one says that. Somebody suddenly very badly wants to pull out their phone on Shabbos. No one goes, I might be a Shabbos violator. Rebbe, what do I do? You don't pathologize these things. I don't know why we pathologize this. That's what the Rebbe is saying. It's just another Yetzer Hara. Don't take it so seriously. You have voices in your head all the time telling you, do the wrong thing. This is just one of them. Don't make a big deal out of it. It's just the evil inclination confusing the power of thought and misleading a person into thinking about other things or opposite things. And for this it will help that which is written in the holy book of Tanya become angry at the animalistic soul, saying, you are evil, wicked, disgusting, etc. So piece of advice number one, insult the part of you that's not really you. You're not insulting yourself. This part's not me. I have a voice in my head saying that God doesn't exist, God forbid. Go, well, that's a stupid idea, and move on with your life. Diminish it. Push back against it. It's not a big deal. And a further path in this that works even better is complete distraction. Hesach hadas. Remember that from yesterday or the day before? When the evil inclination comes with its seductions, respond, now is not the time for this, because we need to learn Torah and do mitzvahs and daven. Second of all, do something else. Change your focus. Remember, what the best tool you have against the Yetzer Hara is distraction. Tell it, sure, we'll get to your problem in like 5 minutes, but I've got something to do. And then 5 minutes later, I've got something to do. And then 5 minutes later, I've got something to do. Throw yourself into doing the right thing and don't overthink it. You have people who say, suddenly some doubts have crept into my mind. And now I'm not sure I can daven or learn. That's why the Yetzer Hara sent you those doubts. Obviously, don't give in. Do the right thing anyway until it passes, like every Yetzer Hara. This is really the overarching theme in the Rebbe's letters on doubts and faith. Don't make it special. It's not special. It's just another Yetzer Hara. And you know how to deal with the Yetzer Hara. The whole Sefer Tanya Kadisha is essentially written on how to say no to your Yetzer Hara. That's one of the theses of the book. We're very well prepared for how to handle this. Also, since you're having a challenge, and the Rebbe has the same approach to just about every challenge as a standard approach, separate some coins for tzedakah every weekday before you daven, carefully study the daily Chumash, Tehillim, and Tanya that are known, and most importantly, be diligent in the schedule of the yeshiva, and even a little light will push away much darkness. Says the Rebbe, do the right thing, keep your head down, be a good Jew, you have a Yetzer Hara, grow up, so does everybody. That is our approach to faith problems. We make too big a deal out of them. I could show you, literally, one of my podcasts is the Rebbe Letters podcast, where we collect a lot of letters that all have the same shita. I could literally show you, and if you'd like to, you can look it up on my podcast, something like 20 letters that all say this. It's incredible. This answer is so consistent, it's almost cut and pasted to people who have doubts in their faith. So this is very much the Rebbe's position. And it's the position that honestly makes the most sense. It really does make the most sense.
Did people ever write back to tell the Rebbe that it helped?
Generally speaking, the question was, does anybody ever write back to tell the Rebbe that it helped? I wouldn't. For number one, I wouldn't know, because we don't collect the Rebbe's responses. Number two, generally speaking, people do not write good news to the Rebbe. They never do. The Rebbe complains about it again and again, and as a matter of fact, I have a whole Igra shir on the podcast just about the Rebbe complaining people don't write him good news. So usually, some people write to the Rebbe saying, God forbid, their relative is very sick. The Rebbe will say, Refuah Shlema Azkir al Tzion, I'll mention it by the Tzion. They'll get better, and they'll never write to the Rebbe saying they got better. This is just, the Rebbe complains about this very openly in many, many letters, saying, I really wish you'd send good news as well. So do send the Rebbe good news. People should be writing to the Rebbe nowadays as well. When you write good news. Don't just write bad news. Yeah?
Just quickly, atheists would say that there is no such thing as a Yetzer Hara.
That's true, they would, and they'd be wrong. See, the Rebbe has a real... No, I don't mean to be flippant. I'm only being flippant because the Rebbe is so flippant on this topic. When the Rebbe does not entertain the possibility that there might not be a God, right? So you're talking to the Rebbe. The Rebbe is saying, I know God, I meet him all the time, right? A self-actualized Jew recognizes the existence of God in the world in a very visible way. So to the Rebbe who's writing, and of course to us, as Yidden who right now might not have this Yetzer Hara, hopefully most of us aren't suffering from it right now, it's very clear that Torah is true and Hashem is true and that all of this is real. Once you know the truth of that, it's silly to say anything else. Meaning the flippancy, we're not trying to win an argument, we're clarifying the truth. These are not going to win any debates. You're right. This is not an argument that out-debates an atheist. The Rebbe's not out-debating an atheist. He's looking at a Jew and going, you're wrong about yourself. Grow up. Be mature. Don't be a child. A child turns a Yetzer Hara into an identity crisis. An adult doesn't do that. An adult knows that intrusive thoughts don't define them, right? It takes a very small child to believe an intrusive thought is what I am. You'd have to be childish. It's immature. A grown-up knows intrusive thoughts should be pushed away. Do you know what I mean by intrusive thoughts? It's a word used at least in psychology in America. Apparently most people at some point in time have the intrusive thought that they should do something that would get them killed. Not because they're having suicidal ideation, God forbid, or even because they want to hurt themselves. Just randomly the brain sometimes tells you, do something self-destructive, and then you immediately say no. Like you're walking along a highway and the brain goes, hey, wouldn't it be fun to crowd surf into traffic? And it's not like, this is not the same as suicidal ideation. It's not the same as self-harm. Part of the human condition, maybe you've experienced this before, is that even healthy people who don't want to hurt themselves at all, every now and then have a ridiculous idea pop in their head that they immediately say no to. That's not what I am. Wouldn't it be sick if someone decided, actually what I am is someone who wants to run into traffic. This is who I am. I'm going to have a struggle with this forever. It's changed now. I am the traffic jumper. That's a disease. So the Rebbe says, this is just a thought. It is a silly little thought that popped into your head. You're a Jew. You know there's a God. You're a child of Yitzchak and Yaakov. The Torah guarantees it. So you have an intrusive thought. So you push it away like an adult. You don't run into traffic like a child. Right? So the Rebbe is, the reason why I'm being dismissive is because I'm teaching a class on the Rebbe Shita, and on this point, the Rebbe is very dismissive. The Rebbe is incredibly dismissive of the idea that somebody could truly have steikus and emunah. They have a Yetzer Hara, and Yetzer Haras are hard. I don't mean to be dismissive on that front. The Yetzer Hara is very difficult. The Nefesh HaBahamis is very difficult. Beating your worst habits is the challenge of being alive. There you'll get a lot of sensitivity from the Rebbe, just not when you make it an ideology. So if you write to the Rebbe and say, my Yetzer Hara is really bothering me, it won't leave me alone. I keep having this in my head and I want to get rid of it. I know it's not me, but my Yetzer Hara is bothering me. The Rebbe will give a lot of sensitivity in that answer. But if you write, I am the problem, the Rebbe goes, how dare you speak that way about yourself? You're not the problem, you have a Yetzer Hara. So he's very dismissive of the claim that an urge is an identity. If you talk to the Rebbe about an urge, he has a lot to tell you. As we'll see in some later letters, if I ever get to them. I'm taking my time on letter number 1. But as we'll see in these other letters, when people write to the Rebbe a little differently and say, I know the truth, I know I have an Nefesh Elikis, I know what's right, but I'm struggling with the Yetzer Hara, the Rebbe has very specific advice and real lengthy advice, and really, he plays with the discussion. Here, he's not even willing to entertain it. Don't tell the Rebbe you have a faith problem. You have a Yetzer Hara. Okay. I do want to show you, yes?
I just want to say I learned with some in the community that one of the previous Rebbes, I keep forgetting which one, said to an atheist, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer.
I've used that many times.
Maybe I think we might get around to something like that when we do the rational answers. Absolutely, yes. And I guess that's the case, right? I mean, I could play with it. Okay, I want to continue. These are a lot quicker. Just want to show you some. The Rebbe does have a few letters where he mentions risk factors for doubt in faith, the sort of things that can create this Yetzer Hara. Since we just saw a quote from our Holy Torah, the Rebbe quotes the idea that's in the Talmud and in the Torah that it is impossible for a Jew not to believe in God. That would mean that this is not one of our natural Yetzer Haras. The Jewish people have natural Yetzer Haras, ones that God implanted us with. We naturally have urges for certain negative negative things, and some of them are mentioned in the Torah specifically as things that the Jewish people are drawn toward and have to say no to. This isn't one of them. This isn't one of our natural Yetzer Haras. It's not natural for a Jew to doubt the existence of God because a Jew has a literal piece of God inside them. So given that this is an unnatural Yetzer Hara, it comes from outside. And since it comes from outside, we can figure out what started it and sometimes nip it in the bud. So the Rebbe says back, there are some risk factors. That which I have instructed the young man regarding chalav akum, this would be milk that is not labeled as chalav Yisrael, is based on a story that has been printed regarding the previous Rebbe. Namely, that chalav akum raises doubts in faith. One of the major risk factors in Kabbalah, in Chassidus, is a very old idea that in theory really goes all the way back to the Torah itself, where Moshe Rabbeinu refused to drink from the milk of a non-Jewish woman because one day his mouth would be speaking to God Almighty. It's brought this way in Shulchan Aruch as well, that specifically when it comes to milk as opposed to any other non-kosher product, there's a specific faith problem with milk, that when people drink milk that is not adequately kosher, milk specifically draws a person away from the faith, that it's a new Yetzer Hara that gets introduced into the body. So this is a very old idea. It's codified in Shulchan Aruch in the Code of Jewish Law. It's mentioned in many Hasidic stories, including the one that the Rebbe is referencing here, that not being careful with the quality, the kosher quality of the milk we drink is uniquely able to create a faith problem for a Jew. So namely, chalav akum raises doubts in faith. Among that which I told him, if in all times we needed to be careful with this, as simple and understood, certainly this applies more to young Americans, and specifically those who study in schools that mix good and evil. I brought this because it's a really cool ending right there. What the Rebbe is saying here is, you might have thought that in yeshivas they definitely need to have chalav Yisrael milk at the highest standard. This is a yeshiva. We have to have a high standard. We have to be the vanguard, yes? You would imagine in a seminary, you got to be the vanguard for kashrus. The kashrus needs to be of the highest standard. But if in the schools where they learn Torah in the morning and secular in the afternoon, and where a lot of the kids are a little bit less frum and the families are a little bit more lenient in certain areas, that would be a place not to push chalav Yisrael specifically. Says the Rebbe, you need it more in those schools than you do in the really, really frum schools. If people are learning Torah all day, they're unlikely to be exposed to the Yetzer Hara of atheism. If people are learning secular studies in the afternoon, they are frequently during the day studying ideas that can begin to make them question the faith. If their milk isn't kosher, they are at a complete disadvantage. Meaning people who study secular subjects, and I will expand this to people who work in the secular world, need to be more careful about kashrus than those people who dwell in the tent of Torah. People who are always surrounded by Torah and goodness, they do not have the same challenges as people who are out there, self-included. Those of us who are out there in the world, working in the world, interacting with science, interacting with rationalism, interacting with people who don't always reflect the holy values that God has taught us, we need to be extra careful about our milk, because milk is the gateway for doubts in faith, as is those experiences. So the Rebbe is saying here, especially in schools where they teach secular subjects, you really got to watch the milk. And I think that's counterintuitive. I think a lot of people would have said it the other way. And finally, mikvah. This will not necessarily apply to women. This is a question for your mashpia, for your rabbi, whether it's acceptable to go to mikvah when it's not the specific time for women to go to mikvah. However, gentlemen, the Rebbe says frequently, at least in this one letter, but also in other places, it is completely unacceptable that you only go to mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur. Somebody wrote to the Rebbe saying they go Erev Yom Kippur. Men go Erev Yom Kippur. A lot of women go Erev Yom Kippur. It's a big custom to go Erev Yom Kippur in a mikvah. However, this person wrote to the Rebbe saying they only do that, and the Rebbe says unacceptable, because this is relevant not only to your study of Chassidus, but also to the purity of your body and a general increase in strengthening your faith in God's indwelling. That is, going to mikveh increases faith. So if somebody finds that they have the Yetzer Hara for faith problems, number one, check their kashrus. Without a doubt, check your kashrus. Number two, check your mikveh. And number three, check your Yetzer Hara. I mean, just look in the mirror and go, this is a Yetzer Hara, I can get over this. But if it's really bothering you, the Rebbe does have some advice on how to push back, and also some explanations for how it can get into a person's head in the first place. Because as we've explained, this Yetzer Hara is not one of our natural ones. It sneaks in through non-kosher food. It sneaks in through a lack of purity and a lack of mikveh. And when we strengthen in these areas, this tends to fix us. Okay. That's a section on people writing to the Rebbe with doubts in faith, and the Rebbe's sort of approach that this is just a Yetzer Hara. There's ways to fight the Yetzer Hara. Don't overthink it. I want to move on to rational approaches. And here I want to begin by telling you that it's not completely clear to me, at least it wasn't until I found some of these letters in Sichas, that the rational approach is even a thing that we do. Given that so many letters from the Rebbe where people say, I'm not sure I believe in God, God forbid, the Rebbe responds, sure you do. Buck up. You would think maybe that we don't even deal with the many, many rational approaches in our literature. There are many, many rational, logical reasons why we believe in Torah and God. They've been written down many, many times, going all the way back. Really, this became a big deal around the year 1000, and especially in Spain from the year 1000 until around the year 1400, 1492. This was the major output of Spain. The major outputs of Spain, Spanish Jewry was essentially poetry and the Siddur on one hand, and rational approaches to faith on the other. Your classic books such as the Kuzari, your classic books such as the Moreh Nevuchim, written by Rambam, who was 5 years old when he left Spain. This was one of the legacies of Sephardic Jewry, was the rational approaches to faith, where we can show, using logic and rationalism, that God is real and Torah is real and all the other religions are wrong and that we're right. We can prove it. And you don't see the Rebbe doing it very often. So I might have thought that that's just not something we do nowadays. What we do is we grab a Jew, we shake them, we say, don't forget your Yetzer Tov, don't listen to your Yetzer Hara, move on. And that's somewhat true. It's somewhat true. The Rebbe is hesitant to use the rational approaches. And if we have time later, I'll bring with you, maybe at the very end, why the Rebbe is so hesitant to use the rational approaches. The main reason, which I will reveal right now, that the Rebbe is so hesitant to use rational approaches is that the rules of logic dictate that if there is a logical argument made, there is always a counter-argument, otherwise it is not logical. Meaning any rational argument by design has a counter-argument. Which means that at the end of the day, you could end up debating back and forth and never finding the truth. Whereas the truth of Hashem that's inside you already is clear and direct and has no counter-argument. The only thing that has no counter-argument in classical philosophy is I think, therefore I am. If I am a piece of God, there is no counter-argument. Meaning the only thing the Yetzer Hara really can't fight against is the fact that I'm expressing myself when I express the truth of Torah and mitzvahs. If I use rational arguments, I'm really a sitting duck for a smarter rational argument. But we'll get into that later if we have time, with God's help. Looking up here, this is in Likutei Sichos, volume 26, page 34. The Rebbe says the following: when there is the appropriate introduction of learning the inner dimension of the Torah, as it has been revealed through Chassidus Chabad by the Alter Rebbe, then, and I will add, and only then, it is possible to draw also from Moreh Nevuchim the subjects of knowing God in a way that coincides with Torah HaChassidus. And then you can reveal how Moshe is true and his Torah is true, both in the revealed and the hidden. What the Rebbe is saying here is something he says in quite a few places. I do have an entire shir just on the Rebbe's approach to the Moreh Nevuchim that reflects this opinion again and again, that these rationalistic texts that were produced by the Rishonim can be incredibly valuable for someone who is already schooled in Torah HaChassidus. But for someone who has not yet been exposed to Torah HaChassidus, these things can push you in the other direction. That's absolutely the case. There are people who have read these books that are designed to get rid of faith problems, and these books have introduced faith problems. Because what these books do is they list all the questions that smart people have about God and Torah and answer them. A lot of these questions you've never thought of before. Which means that if you don't first approach these books with a bittul to Hashem and a bittul to the system and a trust in God and a basis of understanding why you believe and what you believe, that that's internal and can never be changed, these books can be very harmful. Once you have that locked down and you know who you are and there's no possibility that you could ever see a piece of information that would ever sway your faith in God Almighty, these books become very useful and you can really read Yiddishkeit into them, read power out of them, but only when done safely. So number one, the Rebbe really doesn't like us jumping into these rationalistic texts. If he's not sure, we know who we are first. And unfortunately, most people do not know who they are, and unless they've studied Chassidus properly, it's very hard to know who you are. There are other approaches that work, but they're not very accessible. The only approach that is accessible to everyone, to identify you as you are and make it very clear that you will never leave the path of Torah and that nothing could sway you, is Torah HaChassidus Chabad. The other approaches are not accessible to everybody. If you know a lot, you can find it in the Gemara. But I don't know a lot of people who can find it in the Gemara. Everybody can find it in Tanya. So the Rebbe says, first of all, I'm not comfortable with people doing this unless they have a proper introduction. Second of all, I want to show you this is a Nigras Kodesh. I threw this one in just this morning, so it's ugly. I kept the middle bar. I hope you'll forgive the ugliness, but I wanted to show you this as well. I translated it again this morning, so maybe the translation's bad. I was writing really quickly while the rabbi was saying, run to the other room, you got to get your wheat bix before the shir starts, and I was typing furiously, but I wanted to get you this piece. The Rebbe says in this letter, even though the truth of the matter is that our Torah and our religion do not require proofs from the outside, because it is revealed and known that the Torah is the fundamental life force of every Jew, there we go, every Jew, and any action to the contrary undermines the foundation of the survival of our nation, both the individual and the group. The Rebbe starts off by saying, Torah is kihem chayinu v'ruch yamenu. We know intrinsically that when we keep Torah, the Jews survive. When, God forbid, we don't, the Jews die. That's not just the general, that's the individual. My life hinges on my belief in Torah, and my life hinges on my observance of Torah. If I want to know whether Torah is true, all I have to do is, God forbid, stop doing it for 5 minutes and watch my life go down the tubes. If I want to know the truth of Torah, look at what happens in Jewish history when Jews keep it and when they don't. It's my entire existence. So a Jew doesn't need proof. A Jew's life is proof of Torah. So the Rebbe says we absolutely don't need these things, but nonetheless, there are some people from some groups that for various reasons, that is the literal translation of how the Rebbe writes it. Some people from some groups for various reasons still require proof from outside perspectives. Some people, they like the rationalism and they like the logic even though it is so clearly known. They want this. They either want our history or archaeology or similar. And since saving one soul is akin to saving an entire world, it is certainly appropriate to influence some of our Jewish siblings in this way, raising them up in the direction of truth. Meaning, if a Jew comes to us and says, I'd be a better Jew if you could show me the archaeological proof, show them the archaeological proof. If they say, I'd be a better Jew if you could prove God from history, prove God from history. If they say, I'd be a better Jew if you use the rational arguments of the Kuzari, bring out the rational arguments if they insist. No Jew needs this. It's not what makes us what we are. But if you insist, absolutely. And since some people insist, that's what we're going to do with the rest of our time. We're going to look at the Rebbe's rational approaches, which he does write in some letters. This is an argument. I labeled it argument from design because that's what a philosopher would call it. This is the Rebbe's version of the classic argument from design. You will find this in more than one place. I actually put primary sources on the bottom just to make things a little more exciting. This is printed in Chayvas Alavavis, which once again was written in Spain. It was really, those 400 years in Spain is where our entire output for this kind of Torah comes from, more or less. The Chayvas Alavavis, that is the same author of the Sha'ar B'tachon. The Chayvas Alavavis is the duties of the heart. There are multiple gates in the Chayvas Alavavis. The most popular one is the Sha'ar B'tachon, the gate of trust, which we've quoted at length previously. It's a big Indian in Chabad to learn the gate of trust. It's one of our number one Sfarim. I believe that it is the most quoted book outside of Hasidus Chabad among Chabad Rebbes. Meaning if a Chabad Rebbe is going to quote a book that isn't Hasidus or Torah or Gemara, he's going to quote this. This is nearly number one on our list, so we're very much into it. This is a different gate though. This is the gate of examination, the gate of Hakira. This is the gate of figuring out what's true about the world. And here he writes, examination of the wisdom manifested in the universe is the nearest way to clarify his existence and the clearest path to know his reality. That is, that if you use the example of the complexity of this planet and the complexity of biological systems and the complexity of physics, it becomes clear that God exists. That's the argument from design. You might have heard before the classic, this world couldn't have been made by itself, it's too complex. That's called the argument from design. The Chavos Alavos makes it, and the Rebbe has a version of it in a letter right here. So I wanted to show you it in the Rebbe's words, because that's what we're doing, right? And what we're doing in this first class is seeing things through the Rebbe's eyes. So this is a letter written from the 4th of Nisan in the year 1955, and the Rebbe writes, it is understood and simple that we also know the existence of God is real in affirmative knowledge. This person had written to the Rebbe asking, is it the case that I can only know that God is real by ruling out the alternative, or can I actively know God using affirmative knowledge? And the Rebbe goes, no, you can do it with affirmative knowledge. And the proof for this is, number one, as when we see a book printed with hundreds of pages, it's simple in the eyes of the viewer that there was a printing house that arranged all of those letters in a way that explains subjects intellectually, etc., and not that ink spilled by chance, and that these drops of ink organize themselves on hundreds of pages into shapes of letters that explain many things. I think we know that you have to write a book yourself. There's the classic monkeys on a typewriter creating Shakespeare, but it's a ridiculous argument. If I see a book and it's written not just letters, but the letters are forming into words, and the words into sentences, and it explains a topic, I know that there's somebody organizing this as a printing house. The Rebbe says that's a bad example because there are better examples. The same applies, except many times more so, when you see a piece of wood or stone or the like, and you know based on this that it contains not hundreds or thousands but billions and billions of atoms all organized in a wondrous way, fitting, established, and extremely precise laws, as explained in the duties of the heart, the source I showed you before. The more science a person studies, and I'm not advocating going to college and studying science unless you plan on using it for your job, but I will tell you from personal experience, the more you know about the world, the more it becomes obvious that this is not a world that could happen spontaneously. And as a matter of fact, most scientists agree with this too. Consistent surveys have shown again and again that when scientists are asked, do you believe in God as the original designer of the universe, the majority, something like 60% in most cultures, tend to say yes. They just don't think he's still around. Now that is a very convenient thing to believe because it solves scientific problems and gets rid of any personal obligations, right? If God made the world and left, then I don't have a scientific problem and I don't have to do anything. You can tell why the Yetzer Hara loves this argument, Azav Hashem es haaretz. It's the original heresy. The original heresy is God made the world and left, and the reason why is it's the most appealing heresy. The most appealing heresy is that I can't explain, no one can explain how a world this complex could have come into being without God. So sure, he was here, but he doesn't care if I'm rotten to other people. That's everybody's favorite heresy. The Yetzer Hara loves that argument. So this is an argument that many scientists would make as well. The more you see the complexity of the universe, especially I work in biology, the more you see the complexity of biological systems, especially how everything has to work exactly in a certain way and the controls that are in place, it's too good to have been made by random chance. And I'll say it a little bit differently, because the Rebbe says it this way in other places. So to say it a little bit differently, it requires a much greater leap of faith to believe that this happens spontaneously than it does to believe in a man in the sky arranging it. And obviously God's not a man in the sky. But even if you want to minimize God to being the most cartoonish version of God you can imagine, that still is less of a leap of faith than telling me this stuff happens spontaneously. It requires incredible faith to believe that the world can spontaneously organize like this. So this is the argument from design in the Rebbe's words. He says, number 2, the same way a person knows of the existence of souls by seeing animals and living things and the like, a person can recognize that God exists. And what he's saying here, he says it in only one sentence, so I have to expand it a little. What he means is that the same way that you know that there's some unseen force that's animating biology, you understand that there's some unseen force animating the planet, that God is the soul of existence. But that's a second argument that I didn't even really want to bring. I just needed to translate the whole section of the letter. That's what we have right up there. So we have the Rebbe's version of the argument from design, which is, once again, he quotes the Chovos HaLevavos, and this is the part of the Chovos HaLevavos that he's almost certainly quoting. There's another one that the Rebbe uses, another classic that you'll find in classical texts, called the argument from expert opinion. This one, I don't believe I brought you a classical text for. The next one I did, so we'll just do the Rebbe right here. Argument from expert opinion is, to be fair, also known as a logical fallacy. Anybody know the name of this logical fallacy? No? You know your logical fallacies? Study logical fallacies. They're a lot of fun. Do it in the bathroom, in your spare time when you're not learning Torah, of course. This is a logical fallacy. This is called the appeal to authority. That is that I'm right because somebody smarter than me says so. That is a logical fallacy. I'm not right because somebody smarter than me says so. It's not a cause and effect. That's what a logical fallacy is. A logical fallacy is when you make a claim and your claim doesn't actually answer the question in the first place. Right, so this is a logical fallacy, but it also is a solid argument. Some logical fallacies are great arguments. Let's read the argument. Yes?
Like we were going to say, we're right, you're wrong, because we're many and you're few.
Right, that's a classical, that's actually a slightly different logical fallacy because it's from the majority, but that is also a logical fallacy, right. A logical fallacy is whenever I make an argument and I claim a cause and effect, but the cause doesn't match the effect. The most classic logical fallacy is the correlation bias, right? I tell you that 100% of people who drink water die. Therefore, water causes, it's true. It's true. Right. That does not mean, so that's not a logical fallacy. That's a statement of fact. Here's the logical fallacy. Therefore, water causes death. Right. So that's a logical fallacy because although I did establish an argument, the cause doesn't equal the effect. So this is technically a logical fallacy, but it's also a good argument. So take it for what it is. The Rebbe says in Yud Daled Av, the 14th of Av, in the year 1959. Let's take, for example, your actual day-to-day life. In the vast majority of instances, when you decide on a course of action, this was originally written in English, by the way, even one that requires I think, because based on the fact that I didn't give you the Hebrew, I suspect this is one that I pulled from English. Even one that requires an expenditure of much energy or money, you don't demand of yourself 100% certainty that the hoped-for results will happen. Rather, you rely on the opinion of others. This is not exactly the fallacy argument where a person's relying on a authority. The Rebbe is saying this. Look at your life. You don't demand absolute knowledge of anything, otherwise you'd be paralyzed. You'd be unable to move. Every scientist will tell you that there is a minimal chance, that the next step I take, the floor will open up and I'll fall through. That's absolutely a chance. All matter, by the way, this is just some basic physics. Because most of the world is empty space, there is a 1 in like trillions upon trillions. I don't think there's a number to describe how low this chance is, but there is an incredibly impossible chance, but a chance that I'll walk through a wall every time I slam into it. If I line up just right. If every one of my atoms lines up just right with the wall's atoms, I will pass through the wall. That is a chance. I don't live like that. I lean on the wall and I'm not afraid that it's going to happen. Wouldn't it be crazy if it happened? Like just then, right? Can you imagine? Like, oops, that did not show my point very well at all. But yeah, there is a chance of anything. We don't live like that. We live with the odds. If we didn't live with the odds, we wouldn't be able to live. So the Rebbe says, you're not sure about much. Demanding that you be sure about God before you do Torah and mitzvahs is not how you live your life. Why give this bar to Torah and mitzvahs and not to other things? The Rebbe says, for example, when you buy a ticket to travel somewhere, you don't first personally examine the bus or the train and study the mechanisms to learn how it works in order to be certain that you'll be able to use this ticket to travel and reach your destination. I'll add, with forgiveness, how many people in the room are confident right now, if I asked you, explaining how planes stay in the sky? How many of you have flown on a plane? Okay, right? That's his point. That's his point. We definitely do rely on expertise of others in our lives constantly. We do not demand complete knowledge of things. We like to know how things work, perhaps, but nobody says, I'm not getting on a plane until I know aerodynamics. It's not what people do. This is true not only in areas where the return on the investment will come immediately so that you'll shortly know for sure. Rather, it's true even in regard to areas where the results will be years in the making. Meaning you make long-term investments based on chance all the time. If you honestly examine your own actions, you will find that you rely not only on your own knowledge, but rather also on what you have been told by reliable people, as long as there's no reason to suspect these people of lying or of having some vested interest in leading you astray. Meaning, sure, you don't trust people if you suspect them of lying, but if you know an honest person who has no reason to lie to you, you do rely on them very heavily. So Rebbe is not saying you just trust everybody blindly. He's saying once somebody has been established as trustworthy, you absolutely trust them all the time. That's how we live. Moreover, the greater number of people testifying that something is true or functional, the greater is your certainty in your decision to rely on them. This one depends on what community you live in. I think in Muncie it might be the opposite. The more people say something's true, the more likely Muncie Jews are to say it's false. But the Rebbe says here that it's true. I speak about my own community. The Rebbe says here we do rely on what general people are doing. You know, there's an old expression, if your friend jumps off a bridge, would you too? And the logical answer is probably. Right? If you're on a bridge and there are 100 people on the bridge and they all start jumping, they probably know something you don't. It's probably a good idea to jump. So this is how we survive as societies. The way we survive as societies is by following the general masses. Although it's a good idea to think for yourself, obviously, and it's a good idea to not follow what everybody else is doing when it's self-destructive, it is worth at least considering what the majority of people are doing, because the odds of everybody doing something self-destructive tends to be fairly slim. Okay. Furthermore, even in life and death issues, such as a serious operation, may God protect us, you rely on the surgeon. How many people here have been under anesthesia and had a surgeon do surgery on them? Well, you were out cold and they had a knife and you literally signed a paper saying they were allowed to cut you open. That's a lot of trust in a human. And by the way, a lot of trust in a human that is not necessarily inherently trustworthy. My microphone fell off. I'm into doctors. I work with doctors. My father's a doctor. A lot of my relatives are doctors. I think doctors are generally trustworthy people, with very few exceptions. I think it's a field that actually draws trustworthiness more than some other fields. So I think as far as medicine goes, it's one of the better ones when it comes to honesty. At the same time, there are definitely dishonest people in medicine, and some of them are surgeons. And we go under their knife, trusting the system, trusting them. So the Rebbe says, you'd be surprised, people say, I'm critical of everything. I ask questions. They act like real intellectuals. Yes, thank you very much. They act like real intellectuals. You go, I'm not the kind of person who would just go into Torah and mitzvahs without being clear that this is real. And the Rebbe goes, no, of course you are. Of course you're the kind of person who would go into Torah and mitzvahs not sure this is real. You go into everything not sure it's real. You go to a surgeon, you get on an airplane, you buy a ticket, you make investments. You act all the time like this. Why is Torah special? I know why Torah is special. Remember? The Yetzer Hara. That's why Torah is special. The Yetzer Hara demands a burden of proof that we don't put on anything. Based on this testimony, you allow a person to do a serious surgery. I think we've explained that outside. The mode of verification is even more widespread regarding events that happened in the past. There is no way to discern now whether events unfolded in one specific manner or another. We cannot prove history itself. We weren't there. Nevertheless, no normal person would doubt the consensus of 3 or 4 historians. Even if they contradict each other in some details, the majority opinion usually is accepted, especially if it's an overwhelming majority, such as 10 or 100, even 1,000 against 1. Anything that happened in history, we're relying on expert consensus and on passing down information. We don't see most things firsthand. So that was original argument, and then this same letter continues into a second argument. But argument number 1 is that we do not demand this burden of proof for anything besides Torah and mitzvahs. People go, I want to be certain before I do mitzvahs. I want to be certain before I dedicate my life to God. I want to be certain about Judaism. We don't demand certainty in any part of our lives. Why should Torah be the exception? We risk our lives all the time because we don't demand certainty. That's argument number 1. And that is the argument from expert opinion. The Rebbe continues with the argument from mass revelation. You've heard this one before. You absolutely have. Let me scroll down and show you the original. The original is the Kuzari, probably. The original is the Kuzari. The Kuzari is written by Rebbe Yehuda Halevi in Spain. And he writes, right? Right. Yeah. Regarding all that is the Torah and all the books of the children of Israel, there can be no doubt as to their veracity. We are certain of the truth of Torah because of their publicity, their permanence, and their revelation before a vast multitude. Everybody received the Torah at Mount Sinai. It was a big, it's called the argument from mass revelation. It's a big one. We are the only world religion. Lahavdil, of course, the other ones are ridiculous and made up. Ours is real, but I'll call us a world religion for the purposes of speaking English properly. We are the only world religion, Lahavdil, that claims that 600,000 men between the fighting age, so 1.5 million people, were all at the foot of a mountain and heard God talk. We're the only ones who make any kind of a claim like that. Other religions, Lahavdil, have tried piggybacking on this claim because it's such a solid one, but they can't actually do it. The Christians, they have a video going around, a couple videos going around, claiming mass revelation. It's not in their texts anywhere, though. When they say mass revelation, they mean like, listen, 5 of us heard this, 10 of us heard this. Not 1.5 million. Our claim is that every single family was there, and you can ask your father and your mother, and they'll tell you that their father and mother said that their father and mother said that, not that they heard, that they saw. That every single Jew can trace themselves back to somebody who actually saw. That is a claim exclusive to Judaism. In other religions, l'havdil, they can trace themselves back to someone who heard from someone who saw. And that's just not the same proof. So the argument for mass revelation. This is also irrefutable, says the Kuzari. A thing occurred to 600,000 people for 40 years, not just the Torah, the time in the desert. 600,000 people, and I will once again tell you it's really 1.5 million, because that's only men, it's only men of fighting age, so you have to double it for women, and then you have to add the old people and the young people. 1.5 million is conservative, could have been 2 million. 1.5 to 2 million people is a good estimate. Something like 1.5 to 2 million people were nourished in the desert for 40 years by magic food that fell from heaven. How do you make that up? How do you make that up? 6 days in the week the manna came down, but on Shabbos it stopped. They testified that they had magic miracle food that wouldn't fall on Shabbos for 40 years in the desert. 2 million people. So it's a Kuzari's argument. The Rebbe is going to make it now in his own words. And this is our last source for the day, and then we'll talk a little bit with God's help. Timing's working out okay today. Maybe we're getting used to this. After that introduction, the Rebbe writes, the fact that the Torah was given on Sinai directly from God is not some new theory that was floated recently. This isn't a new religion. We heard about it from our parents, and our parents heard it from their parents, etc., all the way back, from generation to generation. In each and every generation was transmitted in the exact same version by hundreds of thousands of people from the broadest possible range of backgrounds, all repeating it exactly the same way. From the time of the giving of the Torah, there was never a time or place where the tradition changed. This is wild. The Ashkenazi communities more or less did not know of. They knew of by reputation, but they didn't speak to. They had no contact with the Yemenite community for something like 2,000 years. Literally for something like 2,000 years, at least 1,000. For at least 1,000 years, Ashkenaz and Yemen did not speak. There were no major exchanges of ideas. Rambam reached out to Yemen. There's a Geras Teiman. And some of the Sephardic leaders did. And since those Sephardic leaders reached out and also reached out to Ashkenaz, there was a little bit of cross-pollination, but not much. There are definitely communities, Yemen might not be the best example, but it's the one that comes to my head, where they were cut off from the vast majority of the rest of world Jewry for a millennia. Millennium, at least for 1,000 years. Maybe closer to 2,000 years. The Yemenites show up. We all meet again around the 1940s as we all return to our Holy Land. And as we return to our Holy Land, we meet the Yemenites. We pop open their tefillin, same tefillin. We ask them how they keep Shabbos, same Shabbos. We ask them how they keep kashrus, same kashrus. We ask them for their Sifrei Torah, same letters, same words, down to the letter. No differences. The Jewish people have faithfully transmitted this Torah with all of its mitzvahs and with all of its actual ways of living without making any mistakes. And we can prove it because we met up with different cultures later and we all had the same thing for thousands and thousands of years. This is not a new Torah. This is a Torah that we all heard at Sinai, that we have been passing down faithfully, and that when we compare notes has remained the same 3,500 years later. This is a new kind of mass revelation. I don't want to edit the Rebbe, but I want to edit how we're talking a little bit. Did I cut something? Hang on a second. Yeah, it goes all the way back to the very generation. The children of Israel entered the land of Israel, Yeshua, heard it from their parents who left Egypt, etc. I want to read this paragraph and then tell you what the Rebbe is saying, because he's adding something to the Kuzari. The Rebbe is adding something to the Kuzari argument that makes it stronger. The Rebbe continues. Obviously, if this story was a rumor that had started suddenly in one of the generations since, there could be no way that hundreds of thousands of people would all conspire to disseminate this rumor simultaneously. Namely, that there had been a giving of the Torah. Certainly someone would have objected. What's this new idea we never heard of before? One may expand considerably on this line of reasoning, which is, as mentioned, many times stronger than all of the hearsay evidence upon which you rely concerning events of even 10 or 20 years ago. The Rebbe says, whatever you think you know about history is hearsay compared to how faithfully we have transmitted our history. And I mean even recent history. If I was talking to a room of Americans, I would say, everything you've read about George Washington has been less faithfully transmitted than the Torah by fewer people who had fewer first-hand evidence and have done it less reliably. So everything we believe is less reliable than this. The Rebbe is adding something. That's the Kuzari's argument. The Rebbe is adding something up there that makes the Kuzari's argument so much stronger. The argument isn't just that you can't fool people with mass revelation. Because maybe you can, right? Put on a light show, yeah? Get 2 million people by a mountain, and then have them all, put on a show for them. Make a miracle. Maybe 200,000 people, maybe 1 million people can. That's not the argument, says the Rebbe. It's a deeper argument. When in world history would you introduce this lie in a way that would work? I mean, at what point in world history could you say, hey, newsflash, we're going to start telling our kids starting now that we all saw the Torah at Sinai, 1,000 years ago. Obviously, everybody would push back, no, we didn't. How do you introduce a societal level lie anywhere in history? You can't. You can't introduce a societal level lie in the middle of history. It doesn't work.
Christians and Muslims did, didn't they?
But that's the thing, they didn't introduce a societal level lie. In the middle of history, they said, 10 people saw this, and we believe those 10 people. To introduce a lie, to go to every single Jew in the world and say, your parents and grandparents saw this, you just don't remember. Where do you put that in world history? As the Rebbe said, let's leave it as a question for now. We can address it after if you don't mind. But this is the Rebbe's point. That he says it's taking the Kuzri and making it a little stronger. The Kuzri uses the argument of mass revelation. The Rebbe says, what's the strength of the argument of mass revelation? The strength of the argument of mass revelation is that since everybody was part of it and everybody saw it, there's nowhere in history to insert a lie that you saw it. Yes?
The spread of Christianity and Islam was always through coercion.
That too. That's a fair point. It was always through coercion, the spread of Christianity and Islam. But also theologically, they never had to make the claim, they never had to rewrite history. They pop in and say, God has changed his mind, and he told the 5 of us, or the 10 of us, or the 100 of us, everybody else listened, and everybody else either agreed to listen or were forced to listen. Where do you introduce this lie? God forbid, obviously. But if this is a lie, practically speaking, where do you do it? What, 2,000 years ago? Huh? Right. We can't convince Jews of things that definitely happened. I mean, seriously. I was downstairs today and we had a legitimate argument at the table whether the moon landing happened. I'm not taking a side because I don't want any of you to hate me. I'm just saying, if we can argue over that, we can argue over anything, right? I mean, where in Jewish history do you introduce this lie? Is the Rebbe's sort of question on the Kuzari. Because the Kuzari is saying mass revelation, which is great. The Rebbe is adding the power of mass revelation is that if everybody is claiming that everybody was there, there's nowhere to insert the lie in world history. That's the power of mass revelation. The Kuzari implies this, but the Rebbe brings it to the surface in a very nice way, I think. You might contend that the Christians and the Muslims also number in the millions and also preserve their traditions. And by the way, that's true. Less with the Christians, more with the Muslims, but they've done a pretty good job of preserving their traditions. I will add, although the Rebbe doesn't say it, that these are baby religions. They've been around very, very brief. They're a flash in the pan. They've barely been around. Islam's barely been around 1,000 years. Come back when you've been doing this for 3,500 years and we can talk about the ability to keep a tradition alive across cultures and times. 1,000 years is nothing. Flash in the pan. Christianity, 2,000 years. A joke. We've been at this for 3,500 years since Sinai and change. Honestly, they have very little to tell us about keeping something alive long term. But they have been doing it for a while. 1,000 years isn't nothing, so I'm going to let the Rebbe talk. 1,000 years isn't nothing, but between me and you, 1,000 years is nothing. Behind the eyes of every Jew is 3,500 years of never changing anything the way we do things. Every other religion is a joke. But, however, this poses no challenge at all. Since, as mentioned, there is a basic difference. The Christian tradition ultimately narrows down to one person, the Apostle Saul, or at most 10 or 12 apostles who claim that they heard from someone else. They themselves do not claim to have been privy to this prophecy. In other words, it ultimately is narrowed down to one mortal person who may have made a mistake or change, whether accidentally or purposely. The same is true of the Muslims. The origin of their faith is Muhammad, returning from the desert and claiming he had seen a prophecy. It all comes down to trusting someone. The Jews don't trust anyone. Trust me. We do not tell Jews, trust us. We tell Jews, you were all there. And anybody who wants to say, no, I wasn't, is welcome to speak up. No one has for 3,500 years. That's quite an argument. And it is one of the oldest arguments. It's one of the original arguments. And obviously, I brought you down here. This is the argument in the Kuzari as well. I have a minute, so I can show you some slides. I want to make another argument, which is kind of the Rebbe's argument, but it's my own. My own based on the Rebbe's argument. I made a slideshow a while back, why a scientist would believe rationally. And I will remind you that a Jew believes because a Jew is a chelek alekim imam amish. A Jew literally has a piece of God inside them. I have a part of my neshama. We all have 5 parts of our neshama. 3 are in our bodies and 2 are up there in shamayim. There's a rope between the 2 of them. Not literally a rope, that'd be awkward. But what there is there's functionally a rope between them. Sometimes you'll suddenly feel inspired, and that's because the top part of your neshama is shaking your rope down here. Sometimes your acts of tshuva and good deeds shake your rope up there. You're connected on high, and you're connected up below by 3 parts of your soul down here called the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama, and 2 parts up there called the chaya and the yichida. The chaya, it's testified about in the Gemara, no less. Mazal Yahu Chazi, and explained that way in all of the books of Kabbalah and the works of Chassidus, that there is a part of my neshama called Chaya that is right now in heaven. It's mine, but it's not in my body, and it's looking at God. I don't know what it means to look at God when you have no eyes and God has no form, but it's looking at God. Mazal Yahu Chazi. I have a part of my neshama that's experiencing God right now. Not when I get to Gan Eden, hopefully not, right? Hopefully staying here with Mashiach, but not after 120, not back when I was born. It's not a memory, it's not a future, it's the present. A present aspect of my soul is right now experiencing the delight of God, which means that if I tap into who I really am, I never have a faith problem. Because the real me is there right now. I don't need a rational proof for what I am experiencing. It's better than seeing. I am it. The Torah is my book. I'll take your question in a second if you don't mind. The Torah is my book. I'm the next generation of writing it. The Torah is a book that has been collectively added to by every single Jew of every single generation at all times. It's my story that I'm currently telling. The Torah is my life. It's my life that I'm living. Hashem is the thing powering me and giving me my life in the first place. A Jew doesn't need rational arguments. However, if Jews want them, I think there's a very good rational argument based on one of the Rebbe's letters that I want to build for you, and then with that I'll take your questions if you don't mind. Yeah, you want to do a question first? Okay. There's a term in science called consilience of the evidence. Biologist E.O. Wilson made it very popular, called consilience of the evidence. Consilience of the evidence is that in science in general, we've never proven anything in science. There's such a thing as mathematical proof. Scientific proof does not exist. Every scientist knows this. This is taught when you're beginning your study of science. It's a basic idea in science philosophy. On this, every scientist would agree. We can prove nothing. Nothing. What we can do is we can collect evidence. And when we collect evidence, if there's enough consilience of the evidence, that means that every time I have a piece of evidence, there's a possibility I'm wrong. But that possibility, that weakness, is covered by a different piece of evidence coming from a different direction. And it has a weakness, but that possibility is covered by a different piece of evidence from a different direction. And when the evidence experiences consilience, we say we have so much evidence right now that the weakness of every evidential point is covered by the strength of a different evidential point, and therefore we're pretty sure. And that's the burden of proof for the highest level of science. I will tell you, almost nothing in medicine or in any kind of science actually has full consilience of the evidence. On the rare occasion that it does, we call it a near certainty. We have consilience of the evidence when it comes to God and Torah. Not that you need it, you're a Jew. But in case you're curious, we absolutely have it. We have the argument from design, which we explained earlier, that simply looking at the world tells me that a world this complex could not have been made spontaneously and that there must be a designer. Is there a weakness to that argument? Absolutely. Is there a logical counter-argument? Without a doubt. Maybe it could. Give me billions of years, which we don't have. The world's 5,786 years old. But give me billions of years and a lot of random noise. Maybe you can spontaneously write Shakespeare. There's a counter-argument. It's a proof, but it's not a slam dunk. So let's look at another one. This one the Rebbe doesn't mention as far as I know, but it's a very popular one in Rishonim. It's called the argument from prophecy. The Torah makes predictions, and they happened. The Torah has a prediction that the land will become desolate after we do sins and get kicked out of our land, and all of your enemies who live in it will be unable to make it grow. Something that we saw practically, something that has been historically testified to. That when the Goyim, I shouldn't say it that way, when non-Jews, because some of them were some good, some bad, right? When the non-Jewish nations lived in the land of Israel over the period of time we were not there, they never made anything of it but a desert. I don't think that's their fault. I think it's a prophecy in the Torah that they literally can't. This land doesn't grow for non-Jews. It simply doesn't. No matter how good they are at botany and planting, we have a prophecy it won't grow, and indeed it never grew. And then we came back and it's green again. That's a prophecy in the Torah. The Ramban says this is the great proof and promise to us that there's nowhere in the world a land as beautiful and productive as Eretz Yisrael is when Jews are in it, and nowhere as desolate when Jews are not. There are many such arguments like this brought in the Ramban. So we have an argument from prophecy. Is there a way to disprove this rational argument? Absolutely. Is it a perfect slam dunk? No, it's not. It's another piece of evidence, and we're building consilience. There's the argument from history by a famous Yechiel. I'm going to end in like 5 minutes, Rabbi. Or maybe 2 minutes, 1 minute. I'm going to end right now. Rabbi's saying I have to end right now. There's the argument from history. There's no greater sign and proof than our survival. We've made it this long in exile. What people in 2,000 years of exile could still be the way we are, surviving and thriving? Impossible without God's divine intervention. Is that a slam dunk proof for the truth of God? It's not. But consilience. Halacha is perfect. The system's perfect. Study Jewish law, and you will find again and again that as you study Jewish law, it fits. Everything works together. Tzadku yachtav. The Kabbalah works. The Halacha works. The Nigla works. The fact that everything fits together. Could anything be designed so perfectly by anybody but God Almighty? I don't think so. Is that a proof? It's not. Is it a good argument? It is. The Rebbe had the argument from expert opinion. Trust rabbis. Trust the Rebbe. Trust tzaddikim. How many righteous people have told us the Torah is true? Do we really consider them less reliable than the pilot flying our plane or the surgeon holding our knife? I don't think we do. Slam dunk argument? No. Logical fallacy? Maybe. Consilience? Possibly. Mass revelation, we saw this insight from the Rebbe. The Kuzari, where in history do you institute this lie? Perfect argument? No. Consilience? Fantastic. You put it all together, and you end up with an argument so much stronger than anything we believe. We do not have a single scientific statement. We don't have a single fact that we are certain of that has better consilience than the proof of God in Torah. Not one. It demands suspension of disbelief to have questions about our faith. That's it. Thank you all very much.